In this short lesson, we'll look at using the levels adjustment. This can be found under the Image Adjustments Levels, or by using the keyboard shortcut Control plus L. If we access the adjustment from here, it'll actually change the pixels in our image. So unless we know we won't be using this image again, we would access this using an adjustment layer, which I'll show you later. I'll use the Levels command first because it opens in a larger window. Here we have an OK image straight from the camera, but if we look closely at it, we can see that there's not really very many black tones in it. Neither are there any really white tones. There's some white areas right in here, but they're not really white. They're not popping. We say that this kind of image is lacking in contrast, or it's flat. Let's look at the histogram by bringing up the Levels control. Again, Control plus L. The histogram in the Levels control is a graphical representation of the brightness range of the tones in an image. The left end over here shows the darkest tones. You see this dark triangle here. And then the tones progress to lighter shades of gray as we move to the right. Now, tones in the middle are known as, yep, you guessed it, midtones. When we get all the way over to the right hand edge, we see the amount of white pixels present. These are our highlights, and it's represented by this white triangle. We can change the appearance of our image by moving the triangles. If we look at the shadow end, we see a blank area right here where there's no data, there's no pixels there, there's no really black areas. So let's grab the black triangle and slide it over until our blacks start showing some life. About right there. If we toggle this little preview box on and off, we can see the before and the after. So this image has a lot more life now, even though we've just changed the levels of our blacks. Now, generally we can just move the end sliders to where the mountains start and you'll be alright. In this case, I like the shadows and I like the highlights. If I move this over just a little bit to about right there, you see that's where our mountains start. So in this case, I like the shadows and I like the highlights, but the midtones are not what I saw in my mind when I captured this image. So I want to brighten them up just a little bit. So I'll grab the midtone slider and I'll move it to the left just a little bit. About right there. Now, I know it seems like we'd go the other direction, but it just doesn't work that way. But the more you use it, you'll get used to it. So, now I want just a little more black in there, about right there. Now, that's more like what I want. So, here's the before, and here's the after. Now, if I were to click OK and save this image, then it'll change the original. Now, as long as the document is open, we can go back in our history and we can undo what we've done. But once we save the the image, that history is lost. So I'll go ahead and save this as levels edit 1. And I'll save it as a Photoshop file. There. If we close this image and we open it again, we see that if we look in our history window, there's nothing there. So we open it up and Photoshop says, okay, here's your image, what you want to do with it. And I say, well, my laptop screen has a lot more contrast, so I'm going to go back and I want to lower the contrast to what I had to start with. And Photoshop says, here's your image, what you want to do with it. Because it's been changed and there's nothing there that I can go back to and undo. So that's just one example of why we don't want to be changing pixels permanently. And this is where adjustment layers come into play. Let's open our original file again. And this time, let's do the exact same thing, but this time we're using adjustment layers. Now, adjustment layers have their own little window, which you can open from going up here to Window, Adjustments, and you have all these little icons here that tells you the different kinds of adjustment layers. You can also go, as long as our layers are visible, as long as our layers are visible over here, you can also go down here to the bottom of our layers palette and we can create a new adjustment layer here. And you can pick that with words so you don't have to know what those little icons mean. Okay, so let's do the same thing as before. We'll move our shadow over to where the mountains began. We'll move our highlight slider over to where the mountains began, and we'll change our midtones just a little bit. Now, instead of the preview button that we have this little eyeball icon which shows you a before and after by turning that layer on or off. Let's make that a little bit larger so you can see it. So we can turn that layer off, or we can turn our adjustment layer back on. So there's the before and after. So now we can save this as a PSD, and we'll call it Levels Adjustment Layer. Edit. Save it as a PSD. Close it, and now if we open it again, Photoshop says, okay, here's your image, what do you want to do with it? And I say, well, my laptop screen has a lot more contrast, so I want to go back and lower the contrast to what I had to start with. And Photoshop says, Okay, we'll just turn off that adjustment layer. And so there is my original image, and there's my adjustment layer, so I can go back and change things after the fact, even though we have saved and closed that image. So that's why adjustment layers are important. They don't actually change the original pixels that are in your image.